In this video, I'm going to take you along the Berlin Wall Trail from Checkpoint Charlie up to the East Side Gallery. I'm going to show you photos of then versus now and bring alive the realities of the Cold War era. There are stories of escape, of murder, hope, as well as regeneration. This is part 2 of a multi-part series of videos where I walk the former path of the wall. You don't need to watch part 1 first, but I'll leave a link to that video in the description below. And I'll also leave a link to a map of sites from this video and the previous video also in the description so you can follow this route when you come to visit Berlin, or you can hire me, Steve, from Experienced Berlin Tours to take you around. So without further ado, let's get started. And we start off at Checkpoint Charlie. Checkpoint Charlie is synonymous with the Cold War. It was one of several checkpoints between East and West Berlin and was controlled by the US on the western side. It was reserved for Allied military personnel, diplomats, and foreigners. It soon became a flashpoint in the Cold War, just 2 months after the erection of the Berlin Wall. The crisis began when East German border guards tried to check a US diplomat's papers as the diplomat entered East Berlin. The American refused. Under post-war agreements, the Allies did not recognize East German authority and insisted only Soviet forces had the right to inspect them. In short, the standoff ensued. For 16 tense hours, tanks stood ready to fire. Quiet back-channel talks diffused the standoff. Soviet tanks pulled back first, then the Americans, and Allied access into East Berlin remained unrestricted by East German guards. Today, there are a few tourist attractions, including an open-air exhibit and a museum, not to mention a replica US guard station. The real one is in the Allied Museum in Berlin. And in the street, you can see a double row of stones. These stones mark the outer Berlin Wall, the wall that generally marked the border between East and West Berlin. Much of the Berlin Wall trail is demarcated by these stones, and we're going to start our walk by following this trail east along Zimmerstrasse. By the way, you can also follow the route of this trail with the Berlin History app, something that was a benefit in the production of this video. And just 1 block along Zimmerstrasse, we arrive at Charlottenstrasse. The Western Berlin district that once bordered the wall was and is called Kreuzberg, and I'm standing on the district's northern edge. At this intersection, there once stood a small viewing platform. There were many of these platforms that were placed on the western side of the wall, especially in the immediate aftermath of the wall's creation. West Berliners had many reasons why they wanted to peek into the eastern part of the city in those days. And all along the former path of the wall, you will see relatively new building construction. This area was almost totally transformed, but as you can see in these images, not every building was removed, and some remain till today. Okay, back on the trail. We don't have far to go. This is the memorial to Peter Fechter, an 18-year-old East Berlin bricklayer who, on the 17th of August in 1962, just 10 months after the barrier was installed, tried to escape over the wall at this very spot. However, he was shot by nearby East German border guards and collapsed in the death strip, screaming for help for nearly an hour as East German guards simply watched. Even Western Allied soldiers refused to cross into East Berlin territory to help. Images were captured by the Western press and an international outcry followed. And for many years, a makeshift memorial was located next to where he died. And after reunification, this memorial was put in its place. And on the side facing the street, it states that all he wanted was freedom. It's a sad but fascinating story, but we must continue on. And just underneath the street here at this construction site at Zimmerstrasse 56 was once an escape tunnel. During the time of the Berlin Wall, approximately 70 escape tunnels were built from East Berlin and Brandenburg into West Berlin. Only about a quarter of these tunnels were successful in ferrying refugees to safety, and this was one of them. Rudolf Müller, who had already escaped to West Berlin, dug a tunnel back into East Berlin to rescue his wife, his children, and his sister-in-law. When an East German border guard challenged him at the border and demanded ID, Müller shot and killed the guard, allowing his family to escape through a tunnel into the west. Although originally acquitted, following reunification, Müller was convicted for manslaughter, which was then later upgraded to murder. However, he was only given a suspended 1-year sentence, with the court recognizing the extreme circumstances of his act. And the case highlighted the legal and moral complexities of escape attempts during the Cold War. Reinhold Höhn, the border guard who was killed, is listed as a victim on the Wall of Remembrance at the Berlin Wall Memorial. Moving on. And here we have one of Berlin's most eye-catching buildings. This building belongs to the publishing house Axel Springer, which publishes both Die Welt und Die Bild. It sits on a corner lot that was once part of the Berlin Wall border system and no-go area where the border made a turn to the northeast from Zimmerstrasse. The Berlin Wall is incorporated into the building's design with two distinct sections separated by an atrium that follows the wall route, something that's evident from above. And just across the street is the original Springer building. This was a thorn in the side of the GDR government, publishing its daily headlines on an electric sign at the top of the building. And on the ground level is a memorial that consists of about a dozen pieces of the original Berlin Wall. Standing atop one of these pieces is a man who appears to be trying to balance himself. The sculpture by Stefan Balkenhol was unveiled in 2009 to mark the 50th birthday of Axel Springer's publishing house. Axel Springer the man was an ardent supporter of reunification, and Balkenhol wanted to show the essence of the wall's fall, not as a sudden victory, but as a delicate passage into reunification, requiring responsibility and balance. And just to the west are plaques with quotes from German Chancellor Willy Brandt, German President Richard von Weizsäcker, and US Presidents Kennedy and Reagan. And here is an image showing GDR workers and border guards installing the new version of the wall on land now occupied by the new Alex Springer building. And the buildings in the background of this photo are the unusual examples of border buildings that still exist today. Now we follow the wall as it turns northeast onto today's Axel Springerstrasse. And here's an image showing East German border guards keeping an eye on West Berliners during the same reconstruction phase. Now, several decades after the fact, it seems surreal that this was the reality on some streets in Berlin. And just ahead of you, you can see the Fernsehturm, Berlin's TV tower. And just one block ahead, the path of the wall turns right to head southeast once again. We are now on Kommandantenstrasse, and a quick detour from the theme of this video. This plaque commemorates the Luisienstadtkirche, a church serving Huguenot refugees from France. Many Huguenots were invited by the Prussians to help build up Berlin following the 30 Years' War, and the church was an important part of the fabric of this community. Okay, moving on. And we are following the outer wall, the section that faced West Berlin. Behind it was an area between the walls, where the patrol strip and watchtowers were, and behind that was the no-go area. And all of the buildings to my left are new or relatively new constructions. In this image, it's very apparent how different things once looked in this neighborhood. The zigzagging wall once again makes a turn, this time onto Alte Jakobstrasse. And if you turn around here, you can see clearly that the path of the wall splits the street almost in half. I'm not sure, but I believe that the entire street, including both sidewalks, belonged to East Berlin. Perhaps through negotiations or practical realization, the wall was set back to allow West Berliners access to their buildings. We'll see another instance like this later on this tour. Now, moving on. And once again, the wall turns back to a southeasterly direction onto Stahlschreiberstrasse. It was very striking to me how the buildings on the West Berlin side felt old compared to the east. And halfway down this street, we come to a plaque that commemorates an interesting coincidence. On September 13th, 1964, the American Martin Luther King Jr. was on a visit to Berlin. On that same day, a young East German, Michael Meyer, attempted to cross the Berlin Wall at this point. He was shot by GDR border guards and seriously injured, but was saved by a US military police officer. King rushed to the scene and condemned the dividing wall of hostility. And here is an image that I believe was taken from this spot. It too demonstrates how different things look here today. The brick wall would have been on our right, where the flower beds are today. And moving along. At the end of the block, the wall turns once again towards the north for just one block. And as we turn onto Alexandrinnenstrasse, we find another information board. The plaque mentions a victim of the GDR regime in 1955 before the wall was set up. Wilhelm Runge, a political refugee living in West Berlin, was shot and killed here, not for escaping, but for allegedly smuggling scrap metal to the West. The incident underscores the tensions that existed well before the Berlin Wall was even put up. And all along the route, particularly at street intersections marking a turning point of the wall's path, you will find these Berlin Mauerweg signs. These are important markers because the wall's path today sometimes disappears under new construction or just isn't there at all. And once again, the wall's path turns to the right in a southeasterly direction, this time down Sebastianstrasse. And this street has some delightfully colored buildings on the East Berlin side of the wall. And Sebastianstrasse leads to Heinrich-Heine-Strasse, where the Heinrich-Heine checkpoint was located. Unlike Checkpoint Charlie, which was reserved for Allied servicemen, diplomats, and foreigners, this checkpoint was the designated crossing point for West Germans. It also served as a crossing point for post and consignment goods, due to a successful escape attempt where a truck was used to slam through the border post. The East German guards installed a slalom course to prevent further attempts. And we continue to follow the path along Sebastianstrasse. And I'm not quite certain if the sidewalks on the West Berlin side actually belong to East Berlin or not. The wall was set back, presumably to allow West Berliners walking access to their buildings. And here are some images showing different periods of the wall's existence at this intersection. The path of the wall disappears underneath some new building construction and reemerges just one block to the north at the intersection of Dresdnerstrasse and Waldemarstrasse, where it once again disappears under buildings. And you can see how different things look today at this very intersection compared to this photo from 1962 with an earlier version of the wall. And in this photo, you can see the interior wall in the background. And in this image from 1978, you can see a viewing platform that was once located where the buildings to my left are today. And this is a photograph taken from the viewing platform, giving you a taste of what West Berliners were able to see here. Okay, moving on. We are headed southeast again, this time along Waldemarstrasse. And the path of the wall runs underneath these buildings to my left. We are arriving at a bridge called Waldemarbrücke, which spans over roughly the midway point of a park. This park is a reuse of the Luisenstadt Canal, a canal that was built to connect the river Spree with the Landwehr Canal to the south. And the contours of this old canal-turned park would form the boundary of the Berlin Wall from this point until we reach the Spree. The park's width was tailor-made for what would become known as the Death Strip. And from the southeast corner of the bridge, you can see how things have really changed. This image was taken in 1973, and you can barely make out that this is a bridge. And from the bridge, the wall took a left turn onto Leuschnerdamm, where it once again left only the sidewalk on the West Berlin side of the street. Just imagine exiting your front door to see this concrete slab greeting you. By the way, if you decide to walk this route, there is an interesting historic pub at this corner called Henne. It's been in business for over 100 years, and it's known for its roast chicken. There's also a quaint little beer garden. One thing that I noticed is that the Berlin Wall trail's cobblestones don't reappear until we reach the River Spree. I presume this is because the canal park's contours are so obvious. The basin for the old Luisenstadt Canal is the only part of the canal that still has water today. And these buildings on the left look like they have some pleasant views. Now we make our way around the basin, which leads us to the intersection with Bethaniendamm. And in this photo from 1962, West Berliners can be seen standing on some brick pillars, which are almost butted up against the early version of the Berlin Wall. The Church of St. Michael's is in the background. And you can see these brick pillars as part of the boundary fence along Bethaniendamm today. And as I mentioned earlier, the filled-in canal proved to be an ideal location for the border wall system. And the median on Bethaniendamm has been returned to a park. And perhaps calling it a park is a bit generous. It's more of a path through a green space. There were a few tents pitched on the sides. You probably won't linger here too long. And here is an image from between the walls in 1990, before the walls were removed, looking back at St. Michael's. And we come to the intersection of Bethaniendamm and Adalbertsstrasse. I took this photo looking back toward the park that I just exited. And here is the same intersection in 1976, showing the construction of the final version of the Berlin Wall. The Pythagorean is one long bending road that leads from the basin to the Spree. One of the more famous photos of the Berlin Wall was taken from a West Berlin building somewhere around this spot. There is certainly no green space in the middle of these walls at that time. On our right side is St. Thomas Church. When the wall went up, this striking neo-Romanesque church found its congregation suddenly divided overnight. And just steps from the church is the famous Baumhaus an der Mauer, a treehouse, or more accurately, a garden house, built by Turkish immigrant Osman Kalin in the early 1980s. The land it sits on was technically part of East Berlin, but the wall had been set back a few meters from the actual border for logistical reasons, creating a thin strip of no man's land on the West Berlin side. Kalin began gardening there and eventually built a small house from scrap wood. Both East and West authorities looked the other way. And between the treehouse and the church was another one of the many viewing points along the wall. Due to the curve in the road, viewers from this platform had a more expansive view, both to the southwest and to the north. And here is another before and after photo showing the Berlin Wall butting up against the sidewalk. St. Thomas Church is in the background. From here, we are really just steps away from Schillingsbrücke, or the Schilling Bridge, which crosses the River Spree. From here, you have views of the River Spree both north and south. On the other side of the bridge is Ostbahnhof Station, where the northern end of the East Side Gallery is. The East Side Gallery is the longest piece of the Berlin Wall still in situ, and I will include it in the next part of my Berlin Wall walking tour series. And why not check out part 1, where I talk about the route of the wall from Hauptbahnhof to Checkpoint Charlie. Or perhaps you check out this video on the Berlin Wall Memorial. Thanks for watching, be sure to share this video with your friends, and I'll see you in the next video. Tschüss!